On a frozen morning in March of 1974, on a hill at the back of his own property, Robert Ferris made a decision that would destroy his family and create a hero. The ground was still hard from the night's frost. Robert knew he should wait until afternoon, when the sun would soften the soil and make the slope less treacherous. But he was behind on his plowing, and the weatherman was calling for rain later in the week, and there was never enough time, never enough daylight, never enough of anything. So he drove the tractor up the hill anyway. The rear wheels lost traction halfway up. The tractor began to slide sideways, then backward. Robert tried to correct, but the frozen ground offered no grip. The machine tipped, slowly at first, then all at once. Robert Ferris was 41 years old. He had farmed this land for 18 years, raised 4 children, loved 1 woman, and never once taken a vacation. He had strong hands and a quiet voice, and a way of making everything seem manageable, even when it wasn't. He was dead before the tractor finished rolling. Jimmy Ferris was in the barn when he heard the engine sound change, that terrible grinding, followed by silence. He ran out into the cold March air, ran up the hill, ran toward a future he never asked for, and would never escape. He was 14 years old. Now let me tell you about the Ferris family, because this story only makes sense if you understand what Jimmy was trying to save. Robert and Martha Ferris had married young. Robert was 22, Martha was 19, and started farming a small piece of land in Lancaster County, Nebraska. Over the years, they had built it up to 320 acres, mostly corn and soybeans, with some cattle and hogs for diversification. They had 4 children. Jimmy was the oldest, born in Then came Sarah in 1964, Tommy in 1966, and finally little Emma in The kids grew up the way farm kids do, working alongside their parents, learning the rhythms of the land, understanding that every meal on the table came from their own labor. It was a good life, a hard life, but a good one. Then, in the summer of 1973, everything started to fall apart. Martha Ferris had headaches. At first, she ignored them. Farm wives don't have time for headaches. But they got worse. Then came the dizziness, the vision problems, the day she fell down in the kitchen and couldn't get up. The doctors in Lincoln found a tumor pressing against her spine. They operated, but something went wrong. When Martha woke up, she couldn't feel her legs. She would never walk again. Robert Ferris brought his wife home from the hospital, set up a bed in the living room so she could see the fields she loved, and tried to figure out how to run a 320-acre farm while caring for a paralyzed wife and 4 children. He almost managed it. For 8 months, he almost managed it. Then came the frozen hill, and the tractor, and the end of everything. Let me tell you about the day after the funeral, because that's when Jimmy Ferris became a man, whether he was ready or not. The service was held at the Lutheran church in town. The whole county came. Robert Ferris had been well liked, the kind of neighbor who showed up with his tractor when your equipment broke down, who never asked for payment, who believed that helping each other was just what people did. Jimmy sat in the front pew with his mother. Martha had insisted on coming, had demanded to be lifted into a wheelchair and brought to the church to say goodbye to her husband. Sarah sat on one side of her, holding her hand. Tommy and Emma sat on the other side, too young to really understanding anyway. The pastor spoke about God's plan, about Robert being in a better place, about the family finding comfort in faith. Jimmy heard none of it. He was staring at the coffin, at the plain pine box that contained his father's body, and he was doing math in his head. 320 acres, 140 head of cattle, 40 hogs, the spring planting in 6 weeks, the bills that kept coming, the mortgage payment due on the 1st of every month, and 4 children, the oldest 14, the youngest not yet 4 years old. After the service, after the burial, after the casseroles had been dropped off and the neighbors had said their awkward goodbyes, a man in a gray suit came to the Ferris farmhouse. His name was Harold Dennison. He was from the county social services office. "Mrs. Ferris," he said, sitting in the chair that had always been Robert's chair. I want to start by saying how sorry I am for your loss. Your husband was a good man." Martha nodded. She hadn't spoken since the funeral. Her eyes were fixed on the window, on the fields, on the tractor that was still sitting where the neighbors had towed it after pulling it off her husband's body. "I'm here because we need to talk about the children's welfare." Jimmy was standing in the doorway, listening. Sarah was beside him, holding his hand. "The situation is difficult," Harold continued. "You're unable to care for yourself, let alone 4 children. Your oldest is 14, too young to be a legal guardian. The farm is heavily mortgaged. There's no extended family in the area who could take the children in." "What are you saying?" Jimmy's voice was steady, but his hand was shaking in Sarah's grip. Harold looked at him with something like pity. "I'm saying that the best option, the only realistic option, is to sell the farm, use the proceeds to pay off the debts and provide for your mother's care, and place you children with foster families, possibly together, if we can find someone willing to take all 4, more likely separately." "Separately? I know it's hard to hear, but no." The word came from Martha, the first word she had spoken since the funeral. Harold turned to her. "Mrs. Ferris, I understand your feelings, but no." Martha's voice was stronger now, her eyes suddenly focused. "My children will not be separated. My children will not be taken from this land. My husband built this farm. My children will keep it. With respect, ma'am, a 14-year-old cannot run a 320-acre operation. It's simply not possible." Jimmy stepped forward. "I can do it." Harold looked at him, at his thin arms, his boyish face, his eyes that were trying so hard to look older than they were. "Son, I appreciate your courage, but this is a working farm. It requires adult knowledge, adult strength, adult decisions. You're a child. I'm not a child anymore." Jimmy's voice cracked on the words, betraying him. He took a breath and continued. "My father taught me everything. I've been driving tractors since I was 8. I know the land, I know the equipment, I know the rotation. I can do it. And school. You're in 8th grade. The law requires—" "I'll figure it out." "And your siblings, who will care for them while you're in the fields?" "I'll figure it out." "And your mother, who will—" "I said I'll figure it out." Jimmy's voice was loud now, too loud for the quiet house. Emma started crying. Sarah picked her up, soothing her automatically. Harold Dennison looked at the family, the paralyzed mother, the grieving children, the 14-year-old boy who thought he could hold all of this together through sheer will. "I'll give you 2 weeks, he said finally. 2 weeks to show me you can make this work. If you can't, if the children aren't being properly cared for, if the farm isn't being managed, if anything goes wrong, I'll have to intervene. Do you understand?" "I understand." Harold stood up, put on his hat, and walked to the door. He paused there, looking back at Jimmy. "I hope you know what you're doing, son. I really do." He left. Jimmy stood in the doorway, watching the county car drive away, feeling the weight of 320 acres settle onto his shoulders. That night, after the younger children were asleep, Jimmy went to his parents' bedroom. His mother was lying in her hospital bed in the living room. She couldn't manage the stairs anymore, but his father's things were still in the bedroom, still arranged as if he might come back any moment. Jimmy opened the closet and found his father's work boots. He tried them on. They were 3 sizes too big. He stuffed newspaper into the toes, laced them tight, and walked around the room, trying to feel like a man instead of a boy wearing his dead father's shoes. Then he sat on the bed and cried, the only time he would allow himself to cry for the next 10 years. Now let me tell you about the first year, because that's when Jimmy learned what sacrifice really meant. He dropped out of school. There was no other choice. The farm required 12, 14, 16 hours of work a day, especially during planting and harvest. There was no time for algebra, for history, for the things that normal 14-year-olds worried about. The school sent letters. Jimmy threw them away. They sent a truant officer. Jimmy was in the field, couldn't be reached. Eventually they stopped trying. In 1974, in rural Nebraska, there were cracks you could fall through. Jimmy fell through. He learned to do everything. He learned to wake at 4:30 a.m. before anyone else, to start the chores that his father used to do alone. He learned to cook breakfast for 4 people, nothing fancy, eggs and toast, oatmeal on cold mornings. He learned to pack lunches for school, to make sure Sarah and Tommy and Emma were dressed and fed and out the door when the school bus came. Then, when the bus pulled away, he learned to work. 320 acres of corn and soybeans, 140 head of cattle, 40 hogs, fences to mend, equipment to maintain, fields to plow and plant and cultivate and harvest. Work that would exhaust a grown man, done by a boy who was still growing into his father's boots. He made mistakes. Of course he made mistakes. He planted the corn too early one year, and a late frost killed half the crop. He waited too long to harvest the soybeans another year, and the rain came and the beans rotted in the field. He bought feed from a supplier who cheated him, sold cattle to a buyer who underpaid him, trusted people who saw a child and saw opportunity. But he learned. He learned fast, because he had no choice. And every morning, the school bus passed the farm. Jimmy would be on the tractor, or in the barn, or walking the fence line, and he would stop what he was doing and watch the bus go by. He could see his siblings in the windows sometimes. Sarah's dark hair, Tommy's wave, little Emma's face pressed against the glass. They were going to school. They were going to have normal lives. That was the deal Jimmy made with himself, with God, with the universe. His life was over. He accepted that. He would never have friends his own age, never go to prom, never play football, never do any of the things that teenagers were supposed to do. But his siblings would. His siblings would have everything he couldn't have. That was the deal, and Jimmy kept it. Let me pause here and ask you something. What would you give up to save your family? Your education, your social life, your chance at a future? What about your childhood itself? Not just parts of it, but all of it. Every birthday party, every sleepover, every lazy summer day. Would you give all of that up, knowing you could never get it back? Jimmy Ferris didn't have time to think about those questions. He just acted. He just kept working. And the years went by. Now let me tell you about the birthdays, because this is where the story breaks your heart. In the Ferris household before Robert died, birthdays were sacred. Martha would bake a cake, always from scratch, never from a box. Robert would hide presents around the house for the kids to find. There would be singing and candles, and the one day a year when you got to feel special. Jimmy tried to keep the tradition alive. For Sarah's 11th birthday, just 3 months after their father died, he attempted to bake a cake. He followed his mother's recipe, or tried to. The cake came out lopsided, partly burned on one side, still raw on the other. He scraped off the burned part, covered the whole thing in canned frosting, and presented it to Sarah after dinner. She looked at it. She looked at him. And then she burst into tears. "It's okay," Jimmy said, not understanding. "I know it's not as good as Mom's, but it's not the cake." Sarah was sobbing now. "It's everything. It's Dad. It's Mom being sick. It's you. You're not supposed to be doing this, Jimmy. You're supposed to be a kid like me. I'm fine. You're not fine. You work all day. You never sleep. You never play. You never do anything except work and take care of us. It's not fair. Life's not fair." Jimmy heard the words come out of his mouth and realized, with a chill, that he sounded exactly like his father. "But we do what we have to do." That's what Dad would have said. "Dad's dead," Sarah screamed it, the words echoing in the small kitchen. "Dad's dead and you're trying to be him and you can't because you're 14 years old and I hate this. I hate all of this." She ran to her room. The cake sat on the table, lopsided and sad. Jimmy cleaned up alone, put the cake in the refrigerator, and went out to check on the cattle. It was past midnight when he finished. He never went to bed at all, just started the next day's chores in the darkness, working until the sun came up. He stopped trying to bake cakes after that. Birthdays became quieter affairs, a store-bought cake when he could afford it, a card signed by everyone, a small gift if there was money left over after the bills. But there was one birthday that nobody celebrated at all: Jimmy's. On March 15, 1975, Jimmy Ferris turned 15 years old. He was in the field before dawn, planting corn. He worked until dark. He came home, made dinner for his siblings, helped Tommy with his homework, put Emma to bed. Nobody mentioned his birthday. Sarah had forgotten. She was dealing with her own grief, her own adjustment to this new life. His mother was having a bad day, lost in pain and memories. Tommy and Emma were too young to keep track. Jimmy didn't remind them. He didn't want a celebration anyway. What was there to celebrate? He was 15 years old, and his life was already over. He went to bed that night in his father's boots. He wore them everywhere now, had stuffed them with so much newspaper that they almost fit, and he didn't cry. He had promised himself that first night that he wouldn't cry again until his siblings were safe, until the job was done. He kept that promise. For 10 years. Now let me tell you about the middle years, because that's when Jimmy became someone his father wouldn't recognize. By 1978, Jimmy was 18 years old. Legally an adult, finally. The county had stopped checking on them years ago. Jimmy had proven he could manage. The farm was surviving, if not thriving. The children were healthy, in school, growing up. But Jimmy was not thriving. He had grown into a man's body, but it was a body abused by work. Thick calluses on his hands, a permanent ache in his back, skin weathered by sun and wind until he looked 30 instead of 18. He walked with a slight limp from a fall off a tractor 2 years earlier. He'd been too tired to be careful, and he'd never seen a doctor about it because doctors cost money. He had no friends. How could he? He had nothing in common with people his age. While they were worrying about college applications and girlfriends and what car to buy, Jimmy was worrying about crop prices and equipment repairs and whether he could make the mortgage payment this month. The loneliness was crushing. Some nights, after the chores were done and the children were asleep, Jimmy would sit on the porch and look at the stars and feel so alone that he couldn't breathe. He would think about his father, about the life he was supposed to have, about the future that had been stolen from him. But he never complained. Not to his mother, who had enough to bear. Not to his siblings, who needed him to be strong. Not to anyone. He just kept working. There was a moment in 1979 when everything almost changed. A girl named Rebecca moved to the county. Her family had bought the farm 3 miles north, and she was in Sarah's class at school. She was pretty and kind, and she smiled at Jimmy once at the feed store, and for a week he couldn't stop thinking about her. He thought about asking her to a movie. He thought about driving over to her farm, introducing himself, maybe talking to her for a few minutes. He thought about what it would be like to have someone to talk to, someone who might understand. But then the corn needed harvesting, and one of the cattle got sick, and Emma needed new shoes for school. And there was never enough time, never enough energy, never enough of Jimmy left over after everything else was taken care of. Rebecca eventually started dating a boy from the town. Jimmy heard about it from Sarah. He nodded, said something about how nice that was, and went out to fix the fence that had been broken for 3 weeks. That was the closest Jimmy Ferris ever came to a normal life. One smile at a feed store, 1 week of wondering what if. Then back to work. Now let me tell you about what the sacrifice looked like from the other side. From Sarah's eyes, from Tommy's eyes, from Emma's eyes. Sarah was 14 when she finally understood what her brother had done for them. It was the spring of 9. She was getting ready for the 8th grade dance, her first real dance, the kind with decorations and music and boys who might ask you to slow dance. She had saved her babysitting money for months to buy a dress. She was in her room, trying it on, when she looked out the window and saw Jimmy in the field. He was walking behind the plow, guiding it manually because the tractor's steering mechanism had broken and he couldn't afford to fix it. He had been walking like that for 3 days, miles and miles behind that machine, because the planting had to be done, and there was no other way. Sarah watched her brother, her 22-year-old brother who looked 40, walk slowly across the field, limping on his bad leg, shoulders bent under a weight she was only beginning to comprehend. And she realized, for the first time, what he had given up for her. She took off the dress. She walked out to the field. Jimmy. He stopped, surprised to see her. He was covered in dust and sweat, his face lined with exhaustion. "What's wrong? Is Mom okay?" "Mom's fine. Sarah didn't know what to say. I wanted to help. Tell me what to do." "You've got your dance tonight." "I don't care about the dance." Jimmy looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, the first one Sarah had seen from him in years. "Go to your dance, Sarah. Have fun. That's what I need you to do. But I mean it." His voice was firm but gentle. "I'm doing this so you can do that, so you can go to dances and have friends and be a normal kid. If you give that up, then everything I've done is for nothing. Do you understand?" Sarah started crying. "It's not fair, Jimmy. You deserve to be normal too, maybe. But this is how it is, and I need you to be happy. I need to know that what I'm doing matters." Sarah hugged him, something she realized she hadn't done in years. He was so thin, so tired, so broken in ways she was only beginning to see. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Now go to your dance, and have enough fun for both of us." Sarah went. She danced with a boy named Michael, and ate cookies, and laughed with her friends, and every few minutes she thought about her brother, alone in the field, walking behind a broken plow. She never forgot that night. None of them did. Now let me tell you about Tommy, because his awakening came differently. Tommy was 16 when he finally understood. It was the summer of 1982, and he had gotten his driver's license. For most farm kids, a license meant freedom, the ability to drive to town, to see friends, to escape the endless sameness of rural life. For Tommy, it meant something else. He came to Jimmy with a proposal. "Let me take some of the driving jobs, the grain deliveries, the feed pickups. I can do it now. I want to help." Jimmy was in the barn, repairing a harness. He didn't look up. "You've got school. School's not that hard. I can do both. You've got football practice. I can miss some practices." Now Jimmy looked up. His face was unreadable. No, Jimmy, I'm trying to help, and I'm telling you no. You're going to stay in school. You're going to play football. You're going to do everything normal kids do. That's final." "Why?" Tommy was angry now. The anger of a 16-year-old who thinks he understands the world. "Why do you get to decide everything? Why do you get to sacrifice yourself while we just take from you?" "Because that's the deal." "What deal? I never agreed to any deal." Jimmy stood up. He was only 22, but standing there in the dusty barn, he looked like their father, or what their father might have looked like if he'd lived another 20 years in the span of 10. "The deal I made with myself the day Dad died. The deal that says I hold this family together, no matter what. The deal that says you kids get to have lives, even if I don't. That's not fair to you. I know." Jimmy's voice was quiet. "But it's not about fair. It's about what's right. You think I don't want to go to football games. You think I don't want to drive to town and hang out with people my own age. I wanted all of that, Tommy. I wanted it so bad it hurt." "Then why?" "Because there was no one else." Jimmy's eyes were bright, and Tommy realized with shock that his brother was close to tears, something he had never seen before. "Mom couldn't do it. You were 8 years old. Sarah was 10. Emma was 4. There was no one else. Just me. And I decided that my job, the only job that mattered, was to make sure you three got the childhood I couldn't have." "Jimmy, so no, you're not skipping football practice. You're not missing school. You're going to do everything I couldn't do, and you're going to do it for me, because that's the only payment I'll ever accept for these 10 years. Tommy didn't argue anymore. He went to football practice. He went to school. He did everything normal kids did. But he never looked at his brother the same way again. Now let me tell you about Emma, the youngest, who understood earliest and deepest of all. Emma was 4 when their father died. She had almost no memories of him, just a vague impression of strong arms, a deep voice, the smell of earth and sweat. Robert Ferris was more idea than memory to her. But Jimmy was everything. From the age of 4, the only father Emma really knew was her 14-year-old brother. He was the one who tucked her in at night, who made her breakfast, who walked her to the end of the driveway to wait for the school bus. He was the one who held her when she had nightmares, who put bandages on her scraped knees, who taught her to ride a bike. She loved him with the pure, uncomplicated love of a child who doesn't know that anything is wrong. To her, this was just how families worked. Your big brother raised you. Your big brother worked all day in the fields. Your big brother had gray in his hair at 20 and hands like old leather. It wasn't until she was 12 that she understood. She was doing a school assignment, a family tree project. She had to list everyone in her family and write a little bit about them. For Jimmy, she wrote, "My brother Jimmy is like my dad. He takes care of all of us." The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called her after class. "Emma, I noticed what you wrote about your brother. Can you tell me more about that?" Emma shrugged. "Jimmy does everything. He cooks and cleans and works on the farm. He makes sure we have clothes and food and stuff." "Where are your parents?" "Dad died when I was little. Mom can't walk, so Jimmy takes care of us." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How old was Jimmy when your father died?" 14, I think. Same age I am now. And he's been taking care of your family ever since." "Yeah, for 10 years. Mrs. Patterson looked at Emma with an expression the girl didn't understand. Something between admiration and profound sadness. "Your brother is a remarkable person, Emma. I hope you know that." Emma did know it. She had always known it. But that day, for the first time, she understood what remarkable really meant. It meant sacrifice. It meant giving up everything so someone else could have something. It meant love, expressed not in words but in a decade of work. Now let me tell you about the graduation, because that's where this story reaches its end and its beginning. May 18th, 1984, the Lancaster County High School gymnasium, decorated with streamers and balloons, folding chairs arranged in rows, families dressed in their best, cameras ready. Sarah Ferris was graduating with honors. She had been accepted to the University of Nebraska on a full scholarship. In the fall, she would leave the farm and start a new life. Tommy would graduate next year. Emma 2 years after that. The deal was almost complete. Jimmy sat in the back row wearing a clean shirt and the cleanest jeans he owned. His hands were in his lap, hiding the calluses, the scars, the evidence of 10 years of labor. He was 24 years old. He looked 50. He watched Sarah walk across the stage to receive her diploma. He watched her smile and wave at the crowd, at Tommy and Emma, at their mother, who had been wheeled in for the occasion, at the friends she had made, and the teachers who had helped her. She didn't wave at Jimmy. She couldn't see him in the back row. He had chosen that seat deliberately. After the ceremony, after the photographs and the hugs and the congratulations, Sarah found him. She was still in her cap and gown, her diploma clutched in her hands. Her face was shining with tears and joy and something else, something more complicated. "Jimmy." "Congratulations, Sarah. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. None of us could." "Sure you could. You're smart. You would have—" "No." Sarah's voice was fierce. "Don't do that. Don't pretend like what you did was nothing. Don't pretend like you didn't give up everything, so we could have this." Jimmy didn't know what to say. He had never known what to say when people tried to thank him. "I'm going to pay you back," Sarah continued. "I'm going to become a teacher, and I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to help. You're not going to do this alone forever. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. We all do. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying to repay you, even though we know we never can." She hugged him then, the same hug she had given him in the field 6 years ago when she finally understood. But this time, she didn't let go for a long time. And Jimmy, the boy who had promised himself he wouldn't cry until the job was done, felt something break loose in his chest. something that had been locked away for 10 years. The job was done. His siblings were safe. The deal was complete. For the first time since the night his father died, Jimmy Ferris wept. Let me tell you about what happened after, because this story doesn't end with tears. Sarah did become a teacher. She did come back. 3 years after graduation, she was teaching elementary school in Lancaster County, living in a small apartment in town, driving out to the farm every weekend to help. Tommy took a different path. He went to agricultural college, studied modern farming techniques, and came back with ideas about how to make the operation more efficient. By 1990, he was running the day-to-day operations, finally giving Jimmy a chance to rest. Emma, the youngest, the one who had known Jimmy as a father more than as a brother, became a nurse. She specialized in home care for paralyzed patients. She spent 2 days a week at the farm, caring for their mother, giving Jimmy the first real breaks he'd had in nearly 2 decades. And Jimmy? Jimmy started to live. It was slow at first. He didn't know how to have a life. He had never learned. But his siblings pushed him, insisted, demanded. They threw him a birthday party for his 25th birthday, the first birthday celebration he'd had since he was 13. Sarah baked a cake. It was lopsided, partly burned on one side, still raw on the other, exactly like the first one she had cried over. "I made it wrong on purpose," she said, laughing, "so you'd remember." Jimmy looked at the cake, at his siblings gathered around, at his mother watching from her wheelchair with tears streaming down her face. "I remember everything," he said, "every single day." In 1988, at the age of 28, Jimmy Ferris went on his first date. Her name was Catherine. She was a widow with 2 young children, a woman who understood about sacrifice and loss and doing whatever it takes to keep a family together. She didn't care that Jimmy had no education, no social graces, no experience with romance. She cared that he was kind, that he was steady, that he looked at her children with the same protective love he had shown his siblings. They married in 19... The wedding was held in the field, the same field where Jimmy had watched the school bus pass every morning for 10 years. His siblings stood beside him. His mother, in her wheelchair, watched from the shade of an old oak tree. Jimmy was 30 years old. He looked 45 by then. The hard years had taken their toll. But for the first time in his life, he looked happy. Let me end this story where it began, with a boy and a pair of boots that were too big. Today, those boots sit on a shelf in the Ferris farmhouse. They're worn through, the leather cracked, the soles thin as paper. Jimmy can't wear them anymore. His feet changed shape from years of wearing boots that didn't fit. But he keeps them. They remind him of the boy he was and the man he became. His own sons. He has 2 now. Strong boys who will never know what it's like to lose their childhood, sometimes ask about the boots. Jimmy tells them the story. He tells them about their grandfather, Robert, who died too young, about their grandmother, Martha, who lived to see all her children succeed, about the 10 years when Jimmy was not a brother but a father, not a child but a man. "Were you scared?" his oldest son asked once. "Every day," Jimmy said. "Every single day for 10 years. But I did it anyway. Why?" Jimmy thought about it for a long moment. He thought about Sarah and Tommy and Emma, about all the things they had accomplished, about the lives they had built on the foundation of his sacrifice. "Because that's what family means," he said finally. "You do what has to be done, even when it's hard, even when it's not fair, even when you have to give up everything. Would you do it again?" Jimmy smiled, a real smile, the kind that had been so rare during those hard years. In a heartbeat. The boy who stayed is 64 years old now. His face is lined, his hair is white, his hands are gnarled from decades of work. But his eyes, the same blue eyes that watched a school bus pass every morning for 10 years, are at peace. He kept his family together. He gave his siblings their childhoods. He sacrificed everything and gained something greater in return, the knowledge that he did what was right, even when it cost him everything. Some people run from responsibility. Some people crumble under pressure. Some people take the easy path, the selfish path, the path that leads away from pain. Jimmy Ferris stayed, and that has made all the difference.